I had already been involved in the occult. I had been a Freemason. I had been a member of an occult organization called the Anthroposophical Organization, founded by Rudolf Steiner. I had been trained as an background of extensive reading. When I read the Quran, then I came to this passage there. I came across one passage that essentially said,
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Alhamdulillahilladzi arsala rasulahu bil huda wa dinil haqq liyuzhirahu ala dini kullihi wa kafa billahi syahida. Asyhadu an la ilaha illallah wahdahu la syarikalah wa asyhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluhu la nabiyya ba'dah. Berjumpa lagi dengan channel saya Mars Techno. Saya doakan semoga semua sahabat dalam keadaan sehat selalu. Pada video kali ini kami akan menampilkan kisah mu'alaf, seorang dokter asal Amerika Serikat yang mengganti namanya dengan Umar Zaid. Sebelumnya, beliau adalah mantan anggota rahasia dari organisasi Freemason. Kisah beliau penuh dengan perjuangan dalam memasuki agama Islam. Kita saksikan saja video berikut ini.
Well, as a background of extensive reading, with a background of extensive reading, when I read the Quran, then I came to this passage there. I mean, there were a couple of passages I came across, and I just wept. But I came across one passage that essentially said, we have given the Quran as a mercy and as a blessing, and to complete what came before. Well, I'm here to tell you that I read that book knowing what came before, and not only knowing the scriptures or the parascripture or literature, but also the history. I had already been involved in the occult. I had been a Freemason. I had been a member of an occult organization called the Anthroposophical Organization, founded by Rudolf Steiner. I had been trained as an initiate. I had been trained to leave my body consciously and do astral travel. I knew all of this stuff, and I knew the occult history when I read the Quran. So when I read the Quran, and it talks about the enemies of mankind and these wicked men in high places planted by Allah in all of the cities, I knew who they were. It was not an abstract idea for me. It wasn't something that was just printed words on a paper. I had met them. I had rubbed shoulders with them over the years. Okay, and I knew the way in which they manipulated people, which is one of the reasons I left the States and swore I'd never go back. So, in the privacy of my living room, I became a Muslim. Now, within a day or two, my wife came to get some clothes because she was feeling better and she wanted to get back into some of her regular clothing. So she came to pick them up and before going back to her mother's, because at the time the period wasn't up. And I said, I have something to tell you. I've become a Muslim. And of course she's absolutely shocked, you know, and she was speechless. She really couldn't respond to me. And she gathered her clothes and she said, I have to go. And out the door she went. Next day she came back with her and aunt and uncle and two brothers. Okay, and they told me the one brother who had the best English, he spoke for all of them, and he said, "I understand you've become a Muslim." And I said, "Yes, I can explain what's happened." He said, "We don't want an explanation. We want you gone." It's just like that. Now, I had invested all of my life savings and whatever cash and whatnot in this place. And I was a stranger in a strange land. I left my job in Australia because I was becoming too old to travel back and forth like that and live out of a suitcase. It was making me sick. And my wife had become sick. And I didn't want to entrust her to the surgeons in the Malay medical system, because most of them are incompetent. Not all, but most of them are. And they think otherwise, but this is a problem with the human denial. So, and the medical education system. which they've copied from the West. See, they've made partners with the Jews and the Christians, and they're jumping right into the lizard's hole, as exactly like this the Prophet said. So I stopped working, and I just continued my farm work. I was the only white man in that they'd ever seen planting rice paddy rice on the mountains and raising fish and ducks and chickens. And I would take them I'd slaughter them and take them to the wet market myself, you see. And that market's about 25 kilometers from my farm. And it was run predominantly by the Chinese merchants. And I had a little stall there, and I sold my fish and whatnot. And we made enough money just to get by. But after my conversion, I had to leave. And that was taking some while. I asked them to give me 30 days, 30 days to make preparations, and they agreed. And then, to make a long story short, we tried to patch up the relationship. It didn't work. I eventually did leave after the 30 days were up, about almost a year later. During that year, I wrote my first book, Trinity, the Metamorphosis of Myth, and I really elaborated on all of the knowledge that led to the sermon that I had given the year previously, and it was my first major book. And I remember my wife standing over me at one point, asking me what I was doing, and she looked at the computer, look at some of these things I was writing. She said, "Are you sure you want to write about that?" And I said, "Yeah, I have to. I have no choice." And I said, "As God is my witness, this book will be published." And about a year later, a publisher from West Malaysia contacted me and invited me to come to Kuala Lumpur, and he provided me with a small income and shelter for about 3 or 4 months. And that invitation occurred just at the moment when the Malay government in East Malaysia changed the immigration laws, and I was no longer able to stay because they required foreigners. You couldn't get residency just because you were married. You had to be retired with a substantial pension, and I had no pension. And they wanted you to leave, cross the border every month, which I had been doing, but I used to cross the border and just come back the same day. So it was just a trip across the border, and the border wasn't far from me. But now they wanted you to stay for 2 or 3 days, and that required a hotel expenses. And I didn't have the money for that. So I had to leave. And this man invited me. And
they're coming for you. They're coming for you in the background.
Yes. Yeah, they're coming for me, right? Assalamu alaikum, brother. I had to leave, and he invited me. So Allah provided me a way to go. He bought my airplane ticket. He gave me a place to stay, and gave me a small income in order to help me to get my feet back on the ground there in West Malaysia rather than East Malaysia. And I did some things there. I was editing to reinvent myself, and I was writing. So I did some editing work, and that helped me to get by, put rice in my bowl. But I was always living on the edge, you see, always living on the edge of poverty. And I was, on more than one occasion, I was just a step or two away from being thrown out on the street. Not because I was undesirable, but because I couldn't pay the rent, you see. And each time I came back close, Allah provided another, he made another provision, another connection, another housing, another kind of job. And in any case, the book was written and it was reviewed. It got reviewed by one of the most pious men I've ever met, and he was also the vice president of the Islamic University there. And he reviewed the book and wrote an introduction to the book. The book hadn't been hadn't been published, but he asked me if he could have the manuscript because somebody told him about the book, and he wanted to meet me. He actually came to my farm, and he made a special trip from West Malaysia to East Malaysia to meet me on my farm, and we missed each other. And I was in one place, he was in another place, and he had to go back. So in any case, he told me about a year after I had relocated to West Malaysia that I would have to leave because the secret police were going around behind me to everyone who was trying to employ me or help me, telling them that I was a CIA agent. And I said, gosh, I wish I was. I'd have some money in my pocket, you know. He said, you're going to have to leave the country. And I said, okay, but I don't know where to go. And I had to leave the country every month anyway. So I used to go across the border, because it was the closest border, to Thailand, and just come back the same day. And I usually did that by train. And on one of those journeys, I met a Buddhist monk who was from Sri Lanka. And this was a monk from a sect of Buddhism that did not practice idolatry. You see, Buddha was a monotheist, which is something that most people don't understand. He hated statues and idolatry and burning incense and all this nonsense. This is not his religion at all, not in the original pristine form. And this monk was the first monk that I met who admitted that. And he said he was on his way to Thailand to do some preaching to that effect. And so we got to talking, and I told him my story. And he said, oh, I know somebody who needs an English teacher. And I said, you do? And he said, yes, here, you can call her. And so he called this lady on his phone, and I talked to her, and she hired me over the phone to be an English teacher in Bangkok.
Wow.
And this was a private school that catered to professionals, you know, lawyers and doctors and graduate students who wanted to go to the West and perfect their English. So I got the job, and Professor Arifin Sohaimi, who wrote the introduction to my book and told me I had to leave the country, I told him, I said, well, I have a job, I just don't have money to get there. And he reached into his pocket and he said, I know. He took out some money. These were American dollars, which he'd held on to for about 30 years in his bedroom, top bedroom door. Didn't know what he was going to do with them until that moment. He handed them to me, and that was enough to get me to Bangkok, pay for my first month's rent and food, you see. And so there it is, you know, Allah provided for me again. So I went to Bangkok, and I taught English for a year. And in the meantime, my manuscript made its way to the desk of Professor Osman Bakar, who was then the research director at ISTAC, which is the graduate school, the top graduate school for Muslim alim in Malaysia, and a part of the International Islamic University system of Malaysia. So he read the manuscript, and then he called me, because here at the end of that first year in Bangkok, I was about to be expelled from the country again because they changed the rules about being qualified for English teacher. So here I was, a medical doctor with, you know, all those years of experience, and I was about to be thrown out of the country because I didn't have an English qualification, you see. Most of the English teachers who teach English don't have half the qualifications I had, but they have a piece of paper saying they do. This is the nonsensical climate of the society that we're now living in. So he called me. I got this phone call. I'm a month away from leaving the country, from leaving Bangkok. And he called me and he said, Dr. Omar, I'm Professor Osman Bakar, and I'm at the IIUM ISTAC campus, and I want to know, I've read your book, and I'm really impressed with it. I want to know if you'd come back to Malaysia if I got your position at the university. And I said, sir, if you did, I'd consider that an act of God, and I would have no choice. And so he called me back the next day. It's on. And so he sent me money, and I became an alim overnight. I was hired by the university without going through any interview process, without any application, purely on his word from having read my book. Okay. And that's nothing short of a miracle. Or equivalent to it. I mean, it's not water's coming out of your fingers, but that's, it seemed like it to me at the time. Okay, so I went back, and, you know, I was really shocked because when I signed the contract that I hadn't interviewed for, it was just put in my hands. It says, as an alim, you are required, and I read all these requirements, but I said, alim? Me? I can barely pray in Arabic. You're calling me an alim now. I'm an alim. How does this happen? You see? And Osman Bakar is a fine man, one of the finest men I've ever met, God bless him. And he was head of the Georgetown University Islamic Center for several years before returning to Malaysia. He was the chairman of that department at Georgetown University, and that's not a light position. So when he brought me back to Kuala Lumpur, they put me in a very fine two-bedroom apartment in an exclusive sort of condominium. I was given a job. I was given a salary that was twice the amount they usually give to entry-level research fellows. I was a research fellow as an alim, and I approached him on the first day on the job, and he immediately wanted me to write 2 books. He said, I want you to find the book of Abraham, which is a book nobody's found, and I want you to write a book on the Gospel of Barnabas. So the book of Abraham I'm still working on. I'm putting it into a novel form. And I hope to be able to finish that before I leave this place. The book of Barnabas was entitled The Forgotten Saints. And so I wrote that book, and in the research, in the process of writing that book, I discovered that this one gospel is the link between Isa and Muhammad. There's absolutely no doubt in my mind. Now, I know that there is some controversy about its provenance, but it's legitimate. And whatever the controversies are, they're based on Italian, Spanish conflicts within the Roman Catholic Church, one family vying against another family for papal power. And they used the gospel, and then they made interpolations and all that sort of thing. But the original gospel, like the original Injil, is perfectly understandable if you erase all of these interpolations. And that's not an easy thing to do, because you have to be well-read to do it. And most people, including Muslim alim, are not. So I was able to do that, and God be praised. I recommend that people should read that book, because it clearly makes the link between Isa and Prophet Muhammad. And so I continued working in Malaysia as an alim in this university and a few other universities for the next 10 years. And then at the age of, how old am I now, 72, about 4 or 5 years ago, I had a collapse in my health. I suffered multiple sclerosis. I just collapsed one day when I came home, and I couldn't work anymore. And thank God that now, if you saw me 4 years ago, I couldn't walk without assistance. Now I can because I've modified my diet and a few other things, and I'm able to manage. But I'm still crippled. And then I had a major heart attack, so I retired. Now, I retired to Thailand. I had a Thai wife after divorcing the Christian wife. I had a few other wives in between. They didn't work out, including the born Muslim. I really wanted a Muslim wife. I couldn't find a decent one who was willing to marry me. They all wanted, a house and a car and, all these other things. They, had nothing to do with Islam. We can talk about marriage on another occasion. I've heard some of your comments on it. It needs to be addressed. And so I did that thing, and the born Muslim woman, she was from Indonesia, and she turned out I married her for piety, not because I was attracted to her, but I was attracted to her piety, and I needed a Muslim wife, you see, and so she married me, and she knew I wasn't attracted to her, and she became one of the worst wives I've ever had. I married the Thai lady who converted to Islam, and I really loved her in all the realms. And the born Muslim wife became so jealous that I had to divorce her. It was just impossible to live. And we lived together in the same house. And why do you do that? Well, that's what the Prophet did, isn't it? Of course it is. He lived all his wives, except the Christian wife, they all lived with him at the masjid. They all had their little rooms right next to each other in the masjid. They would wake up in the morning and say, "Assalamu alaikum, sister, how shall we serve our Lord and our husband today?" Well, at least that's what they should have said. And Muslims today, the Muslims today, they don't have this attitude. They want the car, they want the fancy dress, they want the gold, they want the, whatever it is. They want to be treated equal, okay? They don't understand what equality means because no one's thinking clearly. So anyway, I retired to Thailand after my collapse in health. I had a heart attack about a year later, and major surgery requiring quadruple bypass surgery. And that group of people who experienced surgery in Thailand that month at that hospital, I'm the only one still alive. They've all died. So I'm living on extra grace now, I would imagine, because, as a professional musician, I picked up some bad habits, and one of them was smoking. I smoked for 45 years. And so it's been now 4 years that I've stopped, and it's been a great improvement. I still have some way to go. So my Thai wife, after my retirement and my disability, she reverted to some of her pagan ways, having taken charge and usurping the dominion in the marriage as the one who drives and handles everything. And I was helpless. And the things got worse and worse and worse. And then recently, Allah provided me a way out. And it was a way that I didn't like, because I swore, and everyone who knows me personally knows that I swore I would never return to America. And now I'm here in Kentucky with a new wife who's perfectly suitable for me. And she's also a revert from China. And it looks like we're pretty well matched. Now, the reason we got hooked up, so to speak, if I can use that lingo, is that Allah gave me a dream about 10 months ago or so. And then at the same time, or relatively a month later or so, Allah gave her the same dream. In my version of the dream, I didn't know, I was with a woman, but she was behind me, okay? In her version of the dream, I was in front of her. She knew exactly who I was. But it was the same dream. And so we kind of decided, well, that's pretty meaningful. And then we waited for a few other signs after istikhara and all that sort of thing. And Allah made it possible for me to literally escape Thailand and joined this woman. And we were married a couple of weeks ago by under the auspice of Sheikh Omar Belash in Buffalo, New York. Belash and I had been, meanwhile, doing some interviewing like we do here for the last year or so. So now I'm in Kentucky, and it's wonderful to be here. I think Kentucky is one of America's best kept secrets. And I shouldn't say that because I really should keep it that way, but anyway. That's my story so far today. There's a lot more, but I think I've encapsulated 72 years in about 20 minutes or so. I don't know.
Masya Allah, sebuah video yang sangat mengharukan. Kisah masuk Islam yang disiarkan sebuah channel YouTube The Three Muslim. Link channel tersebut akan kami lampirkan pada bagian deskripsi video. Video ini adalah bagian kedua atau yang terakhir. Jadi jika sahabat belum menyaksikan bagian yang pertama, kami sarankan untuk menyaksikannya agar lebih memahami isi dalam video ini. Dengan kecerdasan yang beliau miliki saat membaca Al-Quran, beliau takjub bahwasanya ada satu bagian Al-Quran yang menyatakan bahwa Allah menurunkan Al-Quran sebagai rahmat dan sebagai berkah dan untuk menyelesaikan kitab yang datang sebelumnya. Saya memberitahu Anda bahwa kitab ini mengatakan bahwa mengetahui kitab yang datang dari Tuhan sebelumnya tidak hanya mengetahui kitab suci atau literatur para skriptural, tetapi kitab ini juga mengetahui sejarahnya. Menurut Dr. Umar Zaid, beliau pernah terlibat dalam supranatural, menjadi anggota Freemason, menjadi anggota organisasi penyerap okultisme yang disebut organisasi antroposofis yang didirikan oleh Rudolf Steiner. Saya dilatih sebagai inisiat. Saya juga dilatih untuk meninggalkan tubuh secara sadar dan melakukan perjalanan secara astral. Saya tahu semua hal ini dan sejarah okultisme. Namun ketika saya membaca Al-Quran yang berbicara tentang musuh gaib umat Islam atau musuh gaib umat manusia yang berdiam di setiap tempat yang tinggi yang ditanamkan oleh Allah di semua kota, aku tahu siapa mereka ini. Aku telah bertemu dan bergaul akrab dengan mereka selama bertahun-tahun. Dan saya juga tahu bagaimana cara mereka memanipulasi manusia. Yang itu juga merupakan salah satu alasanku meninggalkan Amerika Serikat untuk selamanya. Lalu aku memutuskan untuk menjadi Muslim dan meninggalkan mereka semua. Nah sahabat, mungkin itu saja sedikit video reaksi dari saya. Mudah-mudahan bermanfaat. Wabillahi taufik wal hidayah. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.